So please welcome Jussi Autio and his speech, How to Evaluate the Financial Viability of Your PC Game. So please, Jussi, it's your time.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about the technical issues, but I'm sure we'll do just fine. So indeed, today's topic is I'm going to go through how we at Resistance Games evaluate our own game concepts and how can you also figure out which of your ideas is better and is it worth doing. But before I go into the actual topic, I think it's good to know where the wind blows, so to speak. So who is me? I'm indeed Jussi Autio, as was mentioned. I'm kind of a rare bird. I would say that I'm very business-oriented designer. I've been in the game business for 15 years. I've been as entrepreneur several times, and I've also been a designer in several companies. Sometimes that being entrepreneur and designer has meant the same thing, but definitely not every time. I've also been a business coach and consultant, and I've helped 15 game companies get established, mostly in my native town, but a couple also in other cities. And currently I work in Resistance Games, making my favorite type of games, which is PC strategy games. And in the meantime, I also teach game design at the Oulu University. So kind of more designer nowadays than the business developer. But in any case, I think that particularly in the younger studios, but definitely sometimes also at more experienced studios, there is a case that someone makes a game that eventually no one wants. And I've come to learn from a very personal experience as well that there are ways to predict that before developing the game and taking all that risks and spending months and maybe years developing the game. So how can we predict if a great game means also great business? Well, the starting point, of course, for all this, particularly if you are to save time and not to evaluate before you have actually made the game, is still means that you need to design the game, at least on the broader level. It means that there shouldn't be any major holes how the game will work. You should have like a proper design ready when you start pondering, is this a good idea? Is this game concept going to work or not? At the same time, it means that you need to know the game, meaning that you also kind of know the competition, but particularly you know what makes the game stand out. So what are the unique selling points of your game? I'm not going to go too deep into the unique selling points, but that is the kind of backbone that will help in the process of kind of establishing the financial viability. And of course, if you're approaching publishers, you definitely need to have clear idea what kind of unique selling points your game has. And that being said, you better know the competition, know the kind of market where you're entering, which means that at least we do often comparative analysis to the closest competitors, so that we know as well as possible what makes our game stand out even before we have started developing the game. So kind of comparing it to whatever market leader or closest competitor, particularly if it comparing to the well-off competitor. Why to do this is, of course, to like to be able to revise your designs early on if you come up with that, yeah, we don't really have a really good unique selling points, how would this game be marketed? So it's still cheap to go back and redesign some aspects. So what I feel that you don't need to be aiming for objectively best all-round game in the genre, even if that would be a great thing to design, of course, that we all want to design games that are objectively perfect. But even if that isn't kind of a must-have, it still needs to be the best from certain angle for certain players. And this is exactly where the unique selling points help. So from which angle and for what type of players what kind of experience they would get from this game that is best in the world. But I didn't come here today to talk about unique selling points. I'm sure someone else talks more about and better about that. So I want to get to the main point, which is indeed how do we evaluate the financial viability of our games. So my goal is with this talk is to help everyone save time and effort and prevent you from developing games that are doomed to fail. We do this for all the concepts that we come up with, and we evaluate them quite early on. So we want to be able to calculate the return of investment point, meaning that how many copies do we have to sell in order for us to get the money back. And this should take into consideration, if we are using publishers, it needs to take into consideration the publisher's return of investment as well. We want to be able to calculate the expected income, kind of like if we make this game 1,000 times, what would be the average or expected income that we are expecting to have. And in some cases, we use this method to also kind of calculate what kind of budget still makes sense. That the development budget might be too big. We of course try to get as big budget as possible, but depending on the genre, maybe the multi-million budget doesn't make sense. Maybe it's too risky, and if we could make it a bit cheaper, then the kind of return of investment point comes earlier, or the 3x or 5x of the development budget comes earlier or more probable. Because indeed, publishers, they will evaluate your game, and you should do that as well. That you shouldn't start developing a game that shows you early on that, yeah, we are lucky if we make our money back, not mention to get it 3 times back or 5 times back, or to just rely that we need to be the outlier, that, oh, we are the exception in this genre, and that's when we make our money back. Same, of course, should be if you're talking to investors. They expect to get their monies back multiple times. So can you somehow show that this game is worth it? And it's up to the math, and particularly in PC premium games, we have better services, better information available to do this than pretty much on the other platforms, where it's a lot bigger work to do exactly this. So how do you evaluate the viability of your game? Well, the short answer is we have sweet spreadsheets. So as designers, we love spreadsheet, but oh, I have a misspelled there. In any case, as business developers, people should also love spreadsheets. So as an overview, what you want to take into consideration is, of course, all the key points that, well, what are the starting point, which is, of course, the number of sales. That is what you eventually want to know, what is a realistic number of sales. But in any case, that's a key thing to take into consideration. You want to understand, of course, that the Steam takes their cut, or distribution channel takes their cut. You might have to share the profits with your publisher if you're using a publisher. If you are self-publishing, then you don't have to worry about that, but you still need to market your game. If you're using Unreal, they take cut of your profits as well after the first million euros or dollars. You want to take into consideration if you agree with your publisher that they recoup their investment first, or maybe they get bigger cut early on and then the royalty share changes. You want to understand that there's value-added tax being paid from the games. The game price, of course, plays a big role. There is a price difference between rich and poor countries, that the same game costs different amount in different countries. And of course, the sales effect, the famous Steam sales or other storefronts sales, and what is that effect on the average price. And I strongly encourage you to consider game concepts that you can expand in case if that is a success. So you might want to take that into consideration as well. And they should, of course, be grounded in reality, not wishful thinking. Everyone knows that if you do make that hit game that is the outlier, then we're all going to be rich. But then having the figures be grounded in reality makes more sense, and so shows all parties involved that you know what you're doing. And once you have this, then hopefully you will build scenarios. So you want to find out that how many copies does the best, let's say 10% in the genre sell, or best 1%, or best 20%. So in order to reach that position, how many copies would we have to sell? And of course, how probable it is to reach the top X percentage of sellers. So how probable is our game going to be to reach the top 20% sellers, or top 10, or top 5, and so forth. And then you just put these things into spreadsheet. So you can, of course, relatively easily make your own spreadsheet, but since we have done the work already, so if someone in the audience wants to use ours, my email is in the last slide, and I'll be happy to share the tools that we use, or the spreadsheet we have created. So you put exactly the previously mentioned basic info into your spreadsheet. On the left, you see, for example, Forex strategy game. When I took the screenshot, there were 158 games in the genre. You have a slot for number of copies sold, engine revenue share, Steam share, and so forth. All the information I listed on the previous slide. And then you just add a bit of math formulas and calculate each step so that you find out how much money would you be making if you have a $40 game, and Steam takes its share, Engine takes its share, and publisher takes its share. You have to pay value-added tax and so forth. And then you can see the outcome, which could look, for example, like this. You can see here that we also take into account the publisher payment, that how much would we. This is just an example project, but we of course want publishers to pay for our development. So there is a slot for it, and the math calculates that how much after recouping we will get money. And of course, if I put smaller number, it shows that the publisher still has still cost to be paid back before we start earning money, or indeed if there is a smaller revenue share. Currently we don't have that in our spreadsheet, but that's of course quite standard as well. So the basics should be pretty clear. The recoup, indeed, you need to understand if you have a recoup clause in your contract, then you need to understand that when will you start earning money and how much is that. And then of course the main thing is the Steam sales effect, or the storefront sales effect, and that is to, like, you can use this or you should use the spreadsheet for two reasons. Early on, when the game doesn't go into discount, what would be the like a break-even point when you start earning money, or how much would you earn money at certain point so that it pays back the investment. And if it's going to take a long time, then when will that take place in the long tail? And what figures we use, we have evaluated this via plenty of publishers that we talk to, so we are pretty confident with the figures, and we've fixed them with the talks with all sorts of publishers in the process. And one cool stuff that was mentioned by a publisher for us is that it's good to have a US dollars exchange rate to euros, as kind of hit back for us that if that's part of the calculations, then it makes all the figures look a bit worse. But that will then take into account that in some low-income countries, they base the price in dollars. So if we are using euros, then it kind of semi takes into account that you can't sell the game with same price in India as you can in the US, for example. Well, this should be pretty obvious, I think. So the big question, of course, is that what is the realistic sales figure then? Well, for that we have a good source, STEAMSPY. I'm pretty sure all the audience knows of STEAMSPY, or at least is aware of, and it has to be said that it's not perfectly accurate, particularly not in games that sell less than 30,000 copies. But for predictions point of view, that really doesn't matter, because unless you're a hobbyist or a very, very small team, the 30,000 copies where STEAMSPY itself says that they wouldn't trust the figures below that number, that doesn't matter, because you definitely need to sell more than 30,000 copies, and a bit of inaccuracy below that, or in any numbers in any case, doesn't matter, because the big picture is what you're after when predicting the viability. It's still, I would say, best there is and better than what's available on other platforms. Like App Annie in mobile is famous, but it's also not perfectly accurate, and it's so expensive that paying 10 euros for, a month for STEAMSPY is nothing compared to what you have to pay for App Annie to get like more accurate, more useful data. So using STEAMSPY to evaluate this is, of course, you need to know what to look for. So 3 steps to getting the actual numbers, and I was hoping I would have shown this in jumping to STEAMSPY to actually show how we do it, but hopefully now that we're behind schedule, maybe I skip that. So what we do is that, okay, I know definitely that XCOM has the subgenre same as our game Company of Crime. So I go to XCOM, I select its turn-based tactics is the best fitting genre. So go and select the subgenre that's best fitting, whether it's visual novel, 4X, turn-based tactics, or whatnot. And then you will get something like with the platformer on the left. You will see the number of games available and sales figure for each. And this is the starting point. Then you have everything there is to build those scenarios. So what these scenarios basically mean, let's go to the next slide, is that how much money would you be making if you are getting to that super hit, being average of the top 1% in that genre? How many copies will it take to get to the top 10%, and so forth? So going through the list of games, for example, here in the platform, top 10, just barely making it to the top 10 would mean that I browse through the STEAMSPY games so that I am 312 at the 312th game, and then I see what figures does that game have, how many copies does it have sold, and then I put those figures into the previously mentioned spreadsheet, and I see how many euros does it come out. I mark them here on the top 10%, and I do the same stuff for the other scenarios. For us, resistance games, we use 10 scenarios. As you can see from the left, we have relatively experienced team with average of 15 years of experience. 14 years. The founding team has 15 years. So we do feel like it should be that ending up with a median sales would be a catastrophe. So that's why it's at the bottom is the median sales. But in any case, then we put through the figures on the copies sold and resistance games income. into their own slots. And then we can variate the probabilities. Probability is basically what does that mean? It means that how probable do we feel that we end up in this slot with this particular game. Of course, we all want to make hit games. We would love to put 100% into the average of top 1%, but that's not very realistic. So give these scenarios the weight that you think is realistic, and make sure that they end up in a 100%. So if you're just a one man and an idea, you shouldn't use the scenarios that we are using, but make sure that you might end up selling less than a median as well, because well, median is the middle that half of the games sell more and half sell less than the median. So build the probabilities to reflect your team, but also your resources and partners. So take into account your team's experience. Take into account if you are using a publisher, how is it EA or is it something smaller, and how experienced they are and how big they are, how much money will they invest into marketing and so forth. And also take into account how risky your game concept is. That what are your USPs? Do they feel like, oh, but this really is the best? If we manage to make it great, then it will be best in the genre. Then change those based on those probabilities. And we have one concept that is clearly either a hit or miss. Then we can increase the high and the low probabilities as well. So make sure that these reflect your game somehow. And it makes sense that particularly if you have multiple concepts that we've always from the get-go, we've had four different game concepts that we're selling. Now we have a couple of more. So we can evaluate those even before we actually start selling any new concepts. Do we want to build a deck or build a demo? Then we do this exercise. And so forth. You can, if you come up with something else that influences that, maybe it has a viral hit potential. Maybe you have some huge influencer partnership that will increase the probability of the higher sectors and so forth. And when you calculate all these together, you will get the expected value. So expected value basically means that if you make this game 1,000 times, what would you expect to have it? Like if we take a regular die, the D6 die, and we throw it 1,000 times and calculate them together, it makes sense to guess that the figure will be 3,500, because the expected value of your regular die is 3.5. So what this basically means is that with this figure, you can go to your publisher or for your investor and show that we believe strongly in this project. And then sure, you might end up discussing are the probabilities right, but in any case, apart from that, it's not a matter of opinion. It's a fact based on something beyond just your own opinion. So that is a good discussion, and hopefully this expected value is multiple times bigger than what the publisher is going to pay for you, or what the investors, or if you're self-publishing, hopefully it's multiple times bigger than what you're putting money in. Well, once you do this exercise, at least we often get that the numbers are really, really bad. Oh my God. Well, that shouldn't come as a surprise. We're in one of the most difficult and most competitive industries out there. So that's why I've never had anything against the DLCs, but I've become also business-wise a huge fan of DLCs and DLC thinking. So how can we expand the game relatively cheaply? Like, sure, all games can be expanded, but can we make, particularly in the early stage, when we're just discussing will this become our official project or not, one key element for us is that, well, how much would it cost to make DLCs? if it's extremely content heavy, then the DLCs will be expensive, meaning that yeah, it's gonna hurt financial wise. But if there is some cheaper way to make sure that we can expand the experience cheaply, that means that this game concept is better than the one with expensive DLCs. And if you can create relatively cheap expansions, then you should take those into account as well. Do the same math for the DLCs. Key difference, of course, is the attach value, meaning that okay, out of those who bought the original game, how many players will buy at least one expansion? This has been the most difficult to base on any real fact because well, STEAMSPY doesn't tell anything about DLCs, but luckily we've had some good discussions with the publishers who we've gone through openly with our estimations. So it can vary anything between 25 and 45%, and we tend to use the 35 in the middle. And then building, of course, another figure that in order to build estimates, then there needs to be a separate figure that how many who bought the first expansion will buy the next expansion as well. And for us, how we estimate in the different scenarios, because if the game sells poorly, clearly the DLCs won't be made. So a simple spreadsheet math that the DLCs also need to be making a profit, then the spreadsheet shows that yes, it will be made and it will add into the total income of the project. And if it would seem that yeah, we need the 200,000 to make the DLC, if it wouldn't make that money back in any given scenario, then it says no, and no money is distributed to the total income of the game. And then indeed do this again, and you can see that yeah, probably your expected value increased because in the best case scenarios that game sells at least okay amount, it probably makes sense to make a DLC in those cases, and only in the bad scenarios you don't make the DLCs. And then what this means that the expected value of course increases. So what are the pitfalls that we see often, and at least then think that there are? Well, often if the genre is overcrowded, if it's so easy genre that even small indies make games for it, probably it's very difficult to get noticed. Not in all cases, like survival genre is surprisingly healthy, even though there is lots of games there. But for us, if the genre is overcrowded and this exercise shows that yeah, it doesn't make sense to make this type of game, then we don't. Of course, we are also limiting ourselves by focusing only on strategy games, but strategy games have subgenres in any case. So we also realize that that we use this method to not go somewhere where the profit is less likely. There are, of course, some genres that don't have really high hit potential, that even the best-selling games in that genre doesn't really like, even if you're the best-selling game or in the top 1% or top 5%, the figures are small. Well, what we then do is that if we love the idea, we might want to make sure that yeah, let's not make it realistic 3D. Maybe we use pixel art or some other ways to make sure that the production values aren't really killing the financial case for this really great game idea. So how much money would we be putting into the game would then of course be smaller, so that we can get the 3x or some x back on the most probable case. And then of course many games are something between different genres. So if it's a mix of multiple genres, then we basically do several scenarios. for both of these genres. I mean, several predictions for both of the or all of the genres. And this basically also tells us, even though we tend to follow the publisher developer model, so that the marketing is more up to the publisher, but this helps us visualize that probably the 4X is better fitting than the turn-based tactics if it has both elements there. So how should we market the game? Which audience should we approach more strongly? Sometimes, of course, if it's really difficult to nail down what genre is there, and if it's if the best fit is super rare, that people don't give that tag in Steam, that it doesn't fit, then the beauty of this approach is that even more high level genre will then work as well, meaning that instead of using 4X, maybe we use the strategy genre, meaning that all the strategy games are there, and then getting into the top 1% now means being in the top 100 games or something. I don't remember how many strategy games there are, but in any case, when the figure is bigger, then like relatively the difficulty remains the same in any case. And of course, if it's a really rare mix of genres, then I would, in order to be realistic, at least to yourself, maybe not to your publisher or investor, but to yourself, if there is that hit or miss chance, then maybe it's better to put the lower tier, like getting into the top 40% chance bigger, so that you take into account the player confusion or marketing difficulties that we're making this artsy game, or indeed that we recognize that this is a more difficult to advertise or market for the players. So final thoughts. USP thinking helps a lot. Maybe indeed it's a chance that if you have really strong USPs, maybe even very crowded genre might be smart. For example, whenever I'm talking to my students at the university, I always use platformer as the example of the worst genre. It's really, there are only few hit games out there, and they very fast become like that you can't make a profit. But yet, just a month ago, or in October, slightly over a month ago, a Finnish studio launched Noita game, which became a really big hit, already now 300,000 copies 1 month later. But then again, it really has exceptionally good unique selling points. Whenever you look at Noita, you know that you can't get that experience from any other game. So it's clear that this the players who love platformers, they advertise their game as a I forgot what the advertisement says, but it's a clear platformer. So anyone who loves platformers knows that, I want to get that game because that's totally different than your regular platformers. And indeed, as I said, we use the prediction spreadsheet for all of our game concepts before we make them into pitch decks or demos, which we only make demos when some publisher is interested in the game. So we save money by not making demos. Everyone insists on having a demo, but not really, not all. If the concept is strong enough, then you can get relatively far with the pitch deck. Usually, of course, eventually you need to make a demo in any case. But and of course, you can still get more data out of STEAMSPY. For example, any game that you go there, you can download the history data from there as well, and another spreadsheet, or rather that's in Excel. So we have is that we can estimate how does the sales differentiate. So that the first month, how many of the in 2 years time did come in the first month, and so forth. And of course, it's easy to get the ballpark how many euros did that game make in its life cycle so far. And indeed, if you want to get a head start in building a prediction tools yourself, I'll be happy to share ours. You saw some parts of it on the slides, but I think we are almost out of time, particularly as we needed to start late. So is there any questions?
Thank you, Jussi. That was really thoughtful and amazing. And I have a question.
Yeah.
What are the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on your processes? Were there any?
For our processes, well, for the biggest impact definitely is that the discussions with the publishers are more difficult thanks to COVID. Earlier, the conferences like this would have been a perfect place to pitch game ideas to financiers, funders, investors, and so forth. But now everything is online and it's so low barrier. So the publishers and investors, which we're also talking to, they are drowning in emails. So earlier when they could use that, there is at least some sort of barrier to go to Game Connection or some other place, then they could select who to talk to, but then they are swamping in email, so it's more difficult. Luckily, we have well, even though our company is relatively young, but we have been around, so we can talk to people we know. So we haven't been hurt as much as I would imagine if someone started a game company a year ago, then they would be in very, very big trouble.
Yeah, oh yes, see a lot of emails. I can set it on my side that I have a lot of emails right now. And regarding the funds, do you have some kind of reserve fund in your model due to the lockdowns, pandemic issues, etc.?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. We in Finland we have the Business Finland supports game studios, and they have specific now corona funds as well, which we have also. Yeah, so which we have also managed to get. So that has helped of course us, but that's tied to us being Finns.
Okay, I see.
But what I've heard from publishers is that since you can't meet face to face, and particularly with the bigger publishers, if they won't invest multi-million euros to a studio they haven't worked before without being able to go and visit them and do the proper due diligence. So at least some have started to fund also the development of prototypes, which is a great thing. It of course means that you're kind of bogged down that hopefully our demo is great enough that they want to fund the rest of the project. But luckily some publishers are willing to share the risk in these times, so it makes sense to approach them as well.
Wow, thank you. It was very awesome. Yeah, thank you. It was nice to meet you. And I think if you have any questions, our viewers, you can ask Jussi via PM here at Pine. So thank you, Jussi, and have a great day.
Yeah, you too. And thanks for having me.